Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Gabby Brazil. I am one of the consultants for this project, and I'm going to wait another minute or two just to see if any more participants join us before we get started.
And just as a heads up, it looks like we do have a little bit of a technical issue where when folks are admitted to the meeting, your name is showing up as test. You should be able to fix that just by hitting the little three dots that are by your image and changing and just renaming yourself to your actual name. I'm sorry about that problem.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Gabby Brazil. I am one of the consultants for this I-5 improvement project. And this is the second equity-based workshop that we've had for this project. Some of you may have been involved last October in the fall when we did the first workshop. And so today I will do a bit of a recap of the project itself and answer some of the questions that we heard from the public at that first workshop before diving into some new content that we're excited to share with you all today. Before that, I'm going to go through some housekeeping items. So one, we do have language interpretation available in both Spanish and Vietnamese. You should be able to look at your sort of toolbar on your screen and access the language channel of your choice. That will allow you to listen to the presentation in Spanish or in Vietnamese. Also, if you are maybe having some technical difficulty, the Spanish translator is Laura, who's on the call with us today, and Van is the Vietnamese translator if you want to do a direct chat with them in case you have any questions or you're having trouble accessing that interpretation channel, as well as Kevin Alvarado, who will be offering some technical support today. Before we get started, I just want to give you guys an overview of what we'll be discussing today. So as I mentioned before, we'll go through some introductions and the project overview. I will do a follow-up on some of the questions we received in workshop 1 in the fall of 2022. There will also be some built-in periods for Q&A. So I encourage you all to use the chat function to submit your questions while I'm speaking. When we get to the Q&A portion, you can also just raise your virtual hand and come off of mute and ask your question verbally. The new content we'll be talking about today are some exploratory equity ideas that we have. So in other words, how we can make this managed lanes project, which is exploring the idea of an express lane. How do we make that scenario more equitable? And then finally, we'll get to next steps. This project is approaching the end of this phase that we are in now, which means you all will be able to participate in a public comment period and review the work that we've done in this phase of the project. As I mentioned, my name is Gabby Brazil. I'm one of the consultants on this project. My colleague, Kevin Alvarado, you heard from a little bit earlier today and may hear from in the chat or during the Q&A portion as well. We're also joined by some members of the Caltrans team. Caltrans is the public agency that is managing this project and pursuing this project. And so we've got a number of team members from Caltrans that have joined us as well. And you may hear them chime in during the Q&A portion. Also, please excuse my voice. I might cough at times. I am getting over being sick. Let me know if I'm not projecting enough. So let's start with a project overview. I want to make sure that anyone who was not previously able to attend the last workshop gets the context about this project. So this project is really about improving your commute on the I-5. So in the graphic on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see what we define or call the project area, right? So the I-5 as a highway corridor is an interstate, right? Hence the I in the I-5. We are specifically focused on a segment of the I-5 within Orange County. So you can see to the north that the project area begins at that Orange County, Los Angeles County invisible line that exists at that point, all the way down to Tustin toward the south. At Red Hill Avenue. And so the reasons that we're pursuing this project is really to improve travel for people on the corridor. So that might be commuters like yourselves, as well as other vehicles on the highway that may be moving goods or other sorts of mobility and trip purposes along the corridor. We are specifically looking at the current carpool lane and the overall experience of traffic on this portion of the corridor, because we would like to provide more reliable and quicker trips. So in other words, if we can make your trip more efficient, that means getting to your destinations in a more timely manner. And then finally, we are looking at different technology options that will help us to monitor and verify how people are using that carpool lane space. Right now, that carpool lane space is designed for carpoolers, but there is not yet a technology in place to verify that that's how it's being used. So the fast track technology, which might sound familiar to you all, as fast track is used in other areas of Southern California, that is a technology that will help us verify how that lane is being used so that it can deliver that faster trip. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a high-level timeline for this project. Through the remainder of this year, we'll be completing the environmental phase and transitioning into the beginning of the design phase of the project. So we're currently in the environmental phase. If you look out a couple of years, we estimate that construction will begin around 2026. And beyond that, the express lane or the changes to the carpool lane will open or go live, so to speak, around 2028 to 2030. So that sort of gives you a sense of the project timeline. So I mentioned that as we are looking at improving traffic on the corridor in this specific project area, that we are giving special attention to the carpool lane that currently exists on the corridor. So we're trying to think about the ways that we can create a more efficient trip in that carpool lane. So if you think about it from a mathematical or logical perspective, right? If you have more people and less cars, which is the intention of a carpool lane, if there are less cars in the lane, the cars can move along quicker, less chances of traffic and congestion and delayed travel times. So we are currently seeing some moderate traffic that's already happening in that carpool lane that makes the travel times less efficient and less reliable. But we are also thinking about the future, right? So I just showed you that sort of project timeline. So the project itself will, work through its phases several years into the future. Over that course of time and beyond that course of time, we're looking at data that lets us know that this carpool lane is at risk of becoming even more congested over the years. And so we're trying to get in front of that and figure out what a solution could look like now. So if we're focusing on a solution specifically for that carpool lane, there are a couple of things we can do that include changing the rules for the number of people required in the carpool lane. It is currently a 2+ carpool lane, meaning your carpool should have at least 2 people in it, including the driver. So we could increase that policy to 3 people, including the driver, as an example. Or we could also explore an option where you would pay to use that lane. So now that you sort of understand that challenge solution model, when we think about solutions, what are the things that we can do to sort of approach this project? One option is what we call a no build. It means we just leave it as it is. It's currently a carpool lane and a 2+ carpool lane more specifically. We could leave it as that. Option A would be to increase the occupancy, as I was just discussing. So increasing the occupancy requirement from 2 people to 3 people. Beyond that, on the right side of the screen, you'll see that there are a few different express lane options that we are also exploring. Express lane meaning that the technology I discussed before, the fast track technology, will be implemented. And that technology will also be paired with a charge to use the lane, which we sometimes refer to as a toll. So there is an option for this existing 2+ carpool lane to maybe become an express lane in the future to deliver that more efficient trip. So with that, I'm going to cover some of the topics that came up at the first workshop that I mentioned. The first workshop we did was in October of 2022 with the community. And we received some questions at that workshop around data. People were interested in seeing data that sort of explains what the current congestion or problem looks like and what the future potential problem might look like or how it gets worse. So essentially focusing on show us the purpose and need for this project. So those are really smart questions that we were excited to get. And at the time, we were actually in the process of analyzing this data. So now that we've analyzed it, I can bring it back to you all and walk you through it. So the next couple of slides will be visuals of the data that sort of explain the purpose and need for this project. So when you think about what traffic currently looks like in the HOV lane, right? How do we know that there's even a challenge to be solved? If you look at this sample, this graphic you're seeing is something we call a heat map. So in areas where you see orange and yellow, that is an indication of speed. So orange and yellow means a slower speed. So the areas where you're seeing that pop of color are areas where we currently know there's some traffic and some congestion. Blue, on the other end of the color spectrum, means that traffic is flowing. It's moving like it should. It's not an area where we're concerned about congestion. So this is the sort of current view of the I-5 corridor. So imagine you are looking down at the corridor in a sort of aerial view. The length of this map represents the length of the project area that we're looking at. So you'll see that I marked the areas where we are seeing congestion. That might give you sort of visual if you are familiar with the corridor. So the Magnolia Street exit to the Lincoln Avenue exit is an area, a stretch where we are seeing existing congestion in that lane. Another area where we're seeing congestion is right around the interchange with the 57 down toward Grand Avenue exit. So you can sort of see from this visual that the areas of congestion today are just that, they're areas, right? We can point to specific places or lengths of the corridor where a person using the lane might be experiencing some moderate traffic. This view, this heat map that you're seeing, it's based on data for morning rush hour traffic. So often when people are making their commute to work. So I want you all to sort of keep this in mind, right? This is this is today, right? This is the current perspective. On the next slide, you can immediately see a change in color, right? The density of color, the amount of color. And this is the perspective of the future, right? This is the window into the future. So you'll see two different graphics. On top is a window into the future of the year 2035. The bottom graphic is a glimpse into the future in the year 2055. So an additional 20 years past the first graphic. So you can see that saturation of color. And if you remember from the previous slide, color represents speed. So those reds and those oranges are representing a slower speed. So if you remember on the previous slide, there wasn't any red. We saw some orange and we saw it concentrated in certain areas that let us know the problem is starting, right? There's some moderate congestion and traffic going on. When we look into the future, I wouldn't describe this as moderate, right? The problem has now advanced into being fairly significant, meaning that there will likely be more obvious and more regular travel time delays. So less efficient trips and trips that take longer. So in this, for these graphics, I didn't highlight specific exit points because you can sort of see that the red and the orange, that slow pace of traffic, it sort of continues fairly consistently as you move through this area of the corridor. So those are some of the differences that between the first slide and this slide when you're looking at the present day and what we anticipate in the future. So like I mentioned, the areas of congestion are larger, the speeds are slower, and there may be additional travel time. So this is the scenario we want to avoid when we're looking at changing those occupancy rules, when we're looking at a potential express lane. Those are solutions to try to avoid the problem that you're sort of seeing mapped out here. Both of these maps represent a scenario in which no solution is implemented and the problem just gets worse over time. Another question we were asked at the first workshop was, how do you know, if you're going to explore the idea of an express lane, how do you know that that's a solution to congestion in the current carpooling? How do we know that has a chance of actually working and delivering that more efficient trip with reliable travel times? So there's 3 points. One, I spoke about the technology, the fast track technology that will allow Caltrans to verify users. In other words, their fast track allows us to ensure that the people that are using the express lane are either high occupancy vehicles, so carpools, or they have paid to use the lane. So the technology allows us to verify both of those scenarios. Now, if the lane is properly used, it delivers that faster trip. The second is that the express lane can potentially deter single drivers from the lane. So right now, don't raise your hands or anything, but sometimes people who are driving alone are actually using the carpool lane, even though they're not in a carpool, right? And so that is a contributor to building up congestion in that lane. But if you had to pay to use that lane, single drivers that currently cheat, so to speak, in the carpool lane may be less likely to do so. And so the people that are using that lane properly will get that more reliable trip. And then finally, express lanes encourage carpooling. Again, the idea of more people, but less vehicles. So typically, if you are in a carpool using that verification technology, we're able to verify that you're in a carpool, and it often express lanes give a discounted rate to people who are in a carpool. So you get that quicker trip for a reduced rate, which can encourage carpooling behavior. So less cars on the road, less traffic. So I'm going to pause now to get any questions that you all might have about the project itself, or about some of that data that I just showed in response to questions we got at the first workshop. Again, you can use the chat, or you can feel free to just raise your hand, which Kevin should be able to see, and then you can come off of mute.
Yes, I think we got a question from Julian earlier, and the question was, when will property owners know their property is impacted or affected by this project? I have a commercial site in the city of Tustin off of Newport at the 5 freeway that may be affected, and the unknown outcome of this is causing significant delays in development. And we had a couple of responses come through. One is that there will be a public hearing this summer that you can attend, and one of the specialists, obviously from the team, can help you and can walk you through the DED document. And that's anticipated to be ready for public review in June. Julian, did you have any other follow-up to that question, or does that kind of give you some of the information you're looking for?
So June would be the soonest that we would know.
Well, let me give a little bit of perspective to what Kevin just shared, to build on some of the responses that you got in the chat. I think it's important to acknowledge, historically, highway development projects have come with the risk of displacing people. Just from myself, just as a transportation planner, this is something that is understood by the transportation industry as a historical injustice and lesson learned. So I appreciate the question. Because of that, I think it's important that we acknowledge that for this project, there would be no additional land acquisition beyond the existing right-of-way. And one of the solutions that we have to be able to achieve that is using some of the space that already exists in the center median, if we needed to build out space for this lane, or if we pursue the dual express lane option. So in other words, there will not be a land acquisition adjacent to the highway that buys out multiple homes and removes businesses and that sort of historical displacement that's happened. We have land to work with to deliver this project already. So if your question was a concern about the displacement of your business, I wanted to offer that in addition to what you heard in the chat.
Yeah, less about the business. We have a commercial vacant piece of land, right, that abuts that freeway. There already exists, I believe, a 10-foot easement for a maintenance lane for Caltrans. And if you guys were to add an extra lane, it would eat up into that easement and possibly add a couple more feet. And that's our issue. We're not a business right next to it. Our land abuts that bridge that's right there at the 5 freeway. So yeah, we just need to know, because this is, delaying anything that we want to do with the land.
Got it. I would encourage you to participate in those public comment opportunities that were identified in the chat. But it is my understanding that we already have the right of way, the land that we need essentially to deliver these alternatives that we're exploring.
And you're saying that that's the median that you would use, the center lanes and whatnot?
There's an option in some areas of the corridor to use space that is currently the median, so just to sort of reduce it. I see Albin, who is with Caltrans, just raised his hand, so I'm going to let him chime in as well.
Hi, Gabby, thank you. Hi, Julian. I'm here on the Caltrans team. I'm from the environmental division of environmental analysis, and I think you pose a very good question. For the really finer details of how our project may or may not impact certain parcels, that would be disclosed in the draft environmental document, and that would be released for public comment, during June or the summer months, which I think Gabby was referring to earlier. So at this point, we have not made any conclusions. We have not finished all of the studies. We're still putting things together. So things are still very preliminary, but that would be the moment in time where you would find out in details whether or not certain parcels would be impacted. I do want to speak to the fact that Gabby was mentioning that a lot of the project is within the right of way, and the plan of the scope of the project is to add the additional lane within the median. But in terms of impacts and analysis and results, it's a little preliminary for us to even share at this point.
Okay, thank you. So will we be notified? How will we be notified of that DED coming out?
You can, I believe, if I may, Kevin, we can have you on our contact list. I believe there's a subscription. Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Costin has a constant contact database where we notify folks who want to be subscribed to get email updates from our project, correct?
Yeah, and Julian, if you registered for this meeting, earlier on, which I'm assuming you did because you're here, and provided your email address, and that'll be automatically added to the contact database. So as long as you use an email that we can reach you at, then you'll be added to that when the next meeting comes up.
And Julian, this is Janalee. I'm the project
Hi,
manager. Hi. Yeah. So the city of Tustin, will be involved during this public, when we do the public circulation. So so that's one way. I know you're probably in contact with the city, but like Cal would say, if you're in our mailing list, then you will know when that public hearing is going to be happening.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and good seeing you, Janalee.
Yeah, good to see you.
Kevin, are there any other questions I should address before I move on to the next section?
Don't see any other hands raised right now or questions that have come into the chat.
Okay. For those of you participating, if a question does come to you, feel free to throw it in the chat. But for now, I am going to move on to the next section. So I spoke a little bit earlier about the potential project alternatives and the way that the different types of solutions we can potentially apply to this project. And one of them was express lanes, right? And so specifically for that potential project alternative, my team has been working on an equity study report that will be part of the environmental document that you all get to review and consume and provide public comment on later in the spring. But as we sort of approach finalizing the drafts of that report, I want to make sure that I am bringing some of the ideas that that report will host to you all, just to make sure that I'm getting a read from you about ideas that you might be excited about. So the idea of equity is to make sure that people have, regardless of race, regardless of income, regardless of sociodemographics, that people have the opportunity to experience benefits from this express lane. And so those people can be folks that currently commute in a vehicle on the corridor. That could be prospective people that may want to start commuting or need to start commuting on the corridor. That could potentially be transit riders getting benefits from this express lane as well, and a few other opportunities that I want to discuss in more detail with you all. So we call these exploratory equity ideas, emphasis on exploratory. So to the point that Alban was making earlier, there is still assessment and analysis and some sausage making going on with the experts on our team. That includes the equity study. So these are ideas that we have brainstormed. These are not ideas that Caltrans has adopted or implemented or is promising necessarily, right? These are just brainstormed ideas that we wanted to share with you all, gauge your interest or excitement in different ideas. And as the project goes forward, we'll need to explore the feasibility of some of these ideas before deciding which ones to actually move forward with. So this is a very preliminary conversation, but we want to make sure to bring you all on that journey. So at the first workshop in October 2022, I collaborated with those participants getting input on equity goals for this project. So on each of these slides in the upper left-hand corner, you're going to see a specific equity goal. And the idea is that the equity goals should not just be rhetoric, right? So the equity ideas that I'm sharing with you all today, they each correlate to a specific equity goal. So how do we achieve this equity goal? Here are some ideas for us to actually follow through on that. So one of the equity goals is collaborative engagement. So, sorry, some things around on my screen. There are a few ways that we could potentially achieve collaborative engagement with the community. One is for us to seek meaningful input from the community. So when I say seek meaningful input, that means going beyond just informing people of what you are going to do that's already been decided, right? Seeking meaningful input means that you all have enough information about the project, about different processes for us to get valuable input to make a decision. So in other words, a community-informed decision. So some of the things that I think we should explore seeking meaningful input on are low income, eligibility criteria. So for example, if a discounted rate for toll is available, but that discount is based on your income, what does that income criteria actually look like? What is the threshold, right? That is something that we have observed other projects across the US that are doing similar express lanes projects. They have had these conversations with the community around low income eligibility criteria. We also want to be able to understand from the public what are some barriers to applying or participating in equity programs. For example, if a program is equity-based, like a toll discount, income-based, like a toll discount, what is the administrative burden that is put on the community member to participate? What is the online registration process? What does the registration process even look like? Is it digital? Can you do it on paper or mail in? Like what are the sort of processes and administrative burdens that might create a barrier for someone who may qualify for a program actually participating and taking that step to learn about the program? And then finally, of all the brainstormed ideas that we'll talk through today, I think it's important that we explore the idea of working with the community to start to shortlist those equitable outcomes or equitable ideas. So of the universe of things that could be explored, as we start to narrow things down based on interest, based on feasibility and other factors, how do we bring the community into that decision-making in those conversations? So that's seeking meaningful input. On the right side, you'll see community partnerships as another theme of collaborative engagement. So this is an opportunity to explore partnering with different cultural organizations, especially to reach non-English speakers or households to make sure that they are included in this project. Community-based organizations. Our first workshop was hosted at the Ponderosa Park Family Resource Center's awesome example of a partnership with a community organization to get the word out about this project and public participation. And community libraries is another place on other projects where I've seen success as an information point for the community. The next goal is access to information. So part of the discussion at the first workshop was a concern about the accessibility of fast-track transponders. So these are some, one of the case studies we discussed at that workshop was a case study of another Express Lanes project where they made sure that the fast track transponder, which is a little box you've got to keep in your car when you're traveling in the express lane, so that that verification process I described earlier actually works. You have to get a transponder, right? If that transponder is available in the places you're already going to, so you don't need to make an extra stop or an extra effort to get one, that is one of the things that can reduce the barrier to people accessing the transponders. So if that transponder is available at grocers or gas stations or other retailers, those are partnerships, retail partnerships that can be explored potentially so that people have access. Multilingual information was also important. So I spoke a little bit earlier about partnering with community organizations and cultural organizations, but also making sure that that translation and interpretation gets pulled through listening sessions, digital content, print content, thinking about where people source their information and get information that they trust that might not always be mainstream platforms and media. So how are we thinking about cultural media outlets, for example? And the last idea on this slide around multilingual information is exploring the idea of having messages in different languages on what we call a changeable message sign. So it's a very technical term, but I'm going to describe it because I think you all are probably familiar with it. This is a digital sign that you see on highways. And it's usually a black background and it's got orange lettering on it. And it might say something like, drive carefully, a winter storm or flooding alert, right? Drive carefully, or click it or ticket, or don't drive in text, little messages like that. Changeable message signs are often used to let people know that an express lane is going to be open on a certain date, so that instead of you finding out by surprise by just driving on the highway, right? The changeable message sign can give you advance notice in the weeks approaching that open date that this change is coming. Now, those signs are always in English. So the idea is to explore whether or not it's possible to have a rotating message that says the same thing in different languages so that all people can be aware of the potential change. Another equity goal is affordable express lanes. You'll see this icon repeat on other slides. This yellow icon of the sort of money figure is just an indicator that these particular ideas would be specifically for people who are income eligible, right? So these are not ideas that would be implemented just for the general public. It would be specifically to make sure that people from lower income households have the ability to experience the benefits from the express lane. So when we look at the theme of reduced toll cost as a way to create affordability, some potential ideas that have been implemented on other projects throughout the US are looking at a one-time dollar credit. So you got your fast track transponder, perhaps from the grocery store, because that's easy and efficient, right? And, now you've got to start a fast track account, and that fast track account provides funding, a funding source for your tolls, right? So the idea would be to provide a one-time dollar credit on your account for new accounts. So you got your transponder, you're a new account holder, a dollar credit would be deposited into your account to sort of jumpstart your express lane experience. So that's a one-time credit, right? There's a variation of that idea, which is a monthly dollar credit. So for low-income users that might need that boost on a more regular basis, the monthly credit would provide a certain dollar amount that is to be determined to allow that low-income user to continue to experience the express lane. Another idea is to reduce the toll rate for low-income drivers that are either single drivers or in a carpool. The final idea you see noted here is to potentially waive toll specifically for people that are in a carpool, right? Again, thinking about that idea of more people and less cars on the road means less traffic, right? So even with an express lane, we still want to encourage that carpooling behavior. And then on the right side, you'll see the idea of an account waiver. So typically, when you have a fast track account, there's a minimum balance that you are required to upkeep. And there are different ways to do that. For example, you can have an auto refill, so to speak, of funding added to your account, maybe on a monthly basis to keep that funding above that minimum requirement. The idea presented here is specifically for low-income eligible users that we might reduce or waive that minimum balance required. I talked about the different types of users earlier, the different types of audiences that could potentially experience benefits from this project. And one of those audiences are transit users. So more specifically, transit users who may not have a personal vehicle and therefore rely on public transportation. So the idea here, which is an idea that Caltrans is congruent, I guess, with an idea that Caltrans is exploring through other work that they're doing, is the idea of creating access to the express lane for bus routes. So in other words, the bus is the biggest carpool ever, right? For select bus routes, how do we sort of identify what existing bus routes could potentially use the express lane and deliver that faster trip to a larger group of people? Or what new bus routes might make sense to develop so that they can actually use the express lane. Here, I think it's important to point out this new icon that you're seeing, which is the purple icon. When we talk about transit riders and buses, I want to be clear, Caltrans is not the bus operations agency in Orange County, right? So Caltrans is not going to single-handedly make these things happen. The purple icon indicates that Caltrans can have a seat at the table and collaborate with other stakeholders to explore these ideas around buses being able to access the express lane. So that collaboration, those discussions have to have multiple players and evolve and sort of play out over time. On the right-hand side, you'll see that income eligible icon again, and this is specifically for access to potential buses that are going to or maybe utilizing the express lane. So if you're riding in this theoretical bus that's theoretically in the express lane, what would it look like to ensure that income eligible riders have a reduced transit fare that they can afford? And if perhaps they need to travel to access that express lane bus, they may do so by using a park and ride lot. So one equity idea would be to make sure that income eligible users can use a park and ride lot for free. In other words, they don't have to pay to park to use the bus to get the more efficient trip. We're working our way to the last two equity goals here. So another equity goal is around equitable investment of potential excess revenue. So in other words, if an express lane is developed, there will be a charge to use the express lane, right? That means that revenue is collecting from that toll. Now, per state policy, the revenue first has to go toward the operations and maintenance of the highway itself. So in my world, kind of boring stuff, right? Your typical, like, we gotta operate and we gotta maintain this infrastructure as it currently is. But if there is excess revenue after those costs have been covered, there are many projects across the US, express lanes projects, that are exploring creative ways to invest that excess revenue. So when we look at what some of the funding or investment opportunities might be, there's two things that come to mind. I'm going to bounce down to the second one here in the second green box that you see at the bottom. That says funding reduced transit fare, right? So that's something we just talked about on the last slide. That idea of making sure that people who are transit reliant can get an affordable trip on the bus that's in the express lane. This excess revenue is one potential way to offer that subsidy. So with that, I'm going to go back to explain more in detail the other option. So the other option is to create a grant program that allows people to, I shouldn't say people, I don't mean individuals. It would allow local or government organizations like a city, for example, within the project area to apply for funding from this grant program to invest in transportation in their area that is not related to the highway itself, right? So this grant program is something that potential grant program is something that I'm calling the SB 743 grant program. So this is essentially a policy that would determine or guide how this excess revenue can be invested, what kinds of projects generally qualify for this potential funding source. So SB means Senate bill. So Senate Bill 743 is a California state policy that's designed to really double down on solutions for climate change impacts, specifically through transportation. So in other words, what are the ways that we can develop or enhance transportation so that it is helping us to meet resiliency against climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and those sorts of environmental considerations. So getting people out of their cars is one of the ways to help reduce the emissions and therefore help resiliency toward climate change. So the types of projects that could potentially be funded through this grant program are bus and rail development, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, transit-oriented development, which is just community development around, usually around stations or bus stops, and multimodal streets. So streets that allow you to move in different ways, whether you're walking or biking or on the bus or using bike share or different things of that nature. So this is a grant program that could potentially be available if there were excess revenue to fund it. And then finally, equitable toll enforcement. So there are two ways that a person could potentially violate the toll rules. You could be in the express lane looking for a faster trip without the fast track transponder. Or you might be in the express lane and you have a transponder, but you don't necessarily have the funds for the trip. And so some other agencies are thinking about, well, what do we do in those scenarios? And there are a few key things I've outlined here, specifically around outstanding balance management and outstanding, sorry, I realized there's a typo on this slide, outstanding balance management and how equity communities might be disproportionately impacted by that. So creating the opportunity for people to manageably pay the violations or the tolls that they owe, and making sure on the right-hand side of the screen, making sure that we think through the consequences for these two scenarios. So think through whether or not we can prevent or reduce the occurrence of a DMV hold for outstanding toll balances. A DMV hold would mean that you could not register your vehicle without paying off the outstanding toll balance. So how do we make sure that's being applied in the right situations and is absolutely necessary? How do we think about preventing or reducing collection agency reporting for these debts? So again, you'll see the icons I spoke about earlier. These are things that are specific to people that are income eligible, not the whole general public. And these are exploratory ideas that would require several conversations with several stakeholders. But it's a way of at least acknowledging that the conversations are worth starting. So I end by just repeating, all of these ideas are just brainstormed ideas. This is very early on in our process. They haven't been vetted. They are not necessarily determined to be feasible, but they're ideas that we think go in the right direction when we think about our equity goals. So with that information, that new information, I want to share what some of the next steps are for you all to stay involved in this project. So I referenced quite a bit back to the first community workshop in October. Since then, between now and then, we also published a community survey, which we got a great response to, lots of feedback in there that is also being become part of the data in the analysis and assessment and sausage making that's going on right now. And then today, here we are at our second equity workshop. Your next opportunity to participate in this project will be the public comment period that we anticipate in May, so late spring of this year. And when I say period, it will be a 45-day period where you'll get to review the environmental documentation. So our data, our analysis of that data, and that environmental documentation will include the equity study that my team is working on and provide some of the context behind the ideas that we just discussed. So I encourage you all to participate in that public comment period and continue to stay involved in the project. That's it for me today. I'm happy to answer any questions that might have built up in the chat, or again, feel free to raise your virtual hand and Kevin will call on you to ask your question.
So far, no questions in the chat. I do not see any hands raised. We'll give it a minute, but yeah, if folks are interested in chiming in, have any additional questions, we're happy to stay on.
Alvin, if you're still on in the meantime, while people might be thinking about their questions, did you want to share a little bit more about how they will hear about the public comment period?
Yes, absolutely. So there's going to be several ways that we let the public know that the draft environmental document is ready for the review and they can provide us comments. So we usually put advertisements in the local circulation newspaper, but we definitely put it in the Orange County Register, which is a countywide newspaper circulation. We will have social media posts on our District 12 Orange County social media platforms, Instagram, and I believe Twitter and Facebook. We also will have a geofenced advertising buffer. So if you are within, if you travel through a corridor, during the public circulation period, you would get push notifications on your, I believe, smartphones or iPads. And then we also send out postcard mailers to those adjacent to the actual project limits. And I think, last but not least, I mentioned this earlier, we also send a email to those that are subscribed to our to get updates about this project. So I believe those are the means that we kind of get the words out about the draft environmental document. Thanks for that, Gabby.
Yeah, thank you, Alvin. I just wanted to make sure people knew this wasn't the one time in March that we're mentioning it and expect them to remember. You will hear about the opportunities again, and there are several ways that Alvin just mentioned that you will sort of get that mental reminder to review the document and participate with your public comments.
Still no hands raised or additional questions in the chat right now.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you to the participants. Thank you to Caltrans for hopping on. Thank you to Kevin for being my Robin this evening for this workshop. I encourage you all to check out the project website. I believe that is one of the ways that you can subscribe to that email list that Alvin mentioned to stay connected. But we are right on time, and I want to be respectful of your time and let you all get back to your families and your evenings. But thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Good job.